It only took a spark. May 16, 1968, East London. In the time it takes to draw a single breath, 22 stories of brutalist ambition became a vertical tomb. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a simple cup of tea and a fatal engineering flaw hidden in plain sight, buried under layers of political hubris. They called them streets in the sky, a utopian dream built of precast concrete. But on that freezing spring morning, the dream collapsed, taking the entire future of high-rise living down with it into a pile of jagged rubble. Post-war Britain was a nation desperate for a miracle. The Luftwaffe had left London scarred, and the surviving Victorian slums were rotting away damp, overcrowded, and diseased. The government needed to house millions, and they needed to do it immediately. The solution they embraced was system building. It was billed as the marvel of the modern age, fast, cheap, and fiercely modern. Ronan Point, looming over Canning Town, was the crown jewel of this aggressive new philosophy. It was a 22-story monolith, assembled by cranes like a giant Lego kit in a matter of mere months. The architects promised a revolution in living standards for the working class. They offered miracles, central heating, indoor bathrooms, modern kitchens, and sweeping views over the industrial docks. For families moving out of soot-stained squalor, this was the promised land. But this gleaming future was built on a deeply dangerous assumption: the belief that sheer speed could safely substitute for structural integrity. High up in the clouds on the 18th floor, in apartment 90, lived 56-year-old Ivy Hodge. She was an ordinary woman living a quiet life. The building she lived in, however, was extraordinary, but for all the wrong reasons. And the brutal physics that would shortly bring them together were utterly merciless. To truly understand the horror of Ronan Point, you must look inside the walls and understand the Larsen and Nielsen system. It was a specialized Danish design strictly intended for buildings no taller than 6 stories. The British engineers, blinded by ambition and government deadlines, took this modest system and stretched it to a staggering 22 stories. Think of it as a towering house of cards, built from identical 4-ton concrete slabs. Each heavy wall panel simply rested on the one below it, holding up the floor above it. They were connected not by a rigid steel skeleton, but by fragile mortar joints and the sheer force of gravity. There was almost zero lateral strength, no backup plan, no structural redundancy. If one piece failed, the entire structure was doomed, and the warnings were there. The engineers willfully ignored a blinking red light. In 1968, the city's gas supply to high-rises was being transitioned to a higher, more volatile pressure. The construction industry already knew that prefabricated panel buildings were terrifyingly vulnerable to internal explosive forces. They knew a relatively small, localized bang could easily push out a single load-bearing panel. Yet, at Ronan Point, they piped the high-pressure gas in anyway. They effectively built a 22-story bomb, placed it in the sky, and handed Ivy Hodge the detonator. 5:45 a.m. The sky outside is pitch black. Ivy Hodge wakes up in the pre-dawn chill. She wraps her dressing gown tight and walks into her small kitchen to make her morning pot of tea. Her senses are dull with sleep. She doesn't smell the invisible, creeping danger. She doesn't realize that gas has been leaking steadily overnight from a substandard, cracked brass nut connecting her cooker to the mains. The room is saturated. She strikes a match. The explosion wasn't a roaring Hollywood fireball. It was shockingly small, sharp, concussive crack. It didn't burn the apartment. It didn't even kill Ivy, but it generated a sudden, violent wave of pressure. It was just enough force to instantly blow out the load-bearing outer walls of her kitchen and living room. They popped out like a cork. For one agonizing, impossible split second, the heavy concrete floor of apartment 94, the 19th floor directly above Ivy's, hung suspended in the cold morning air, supported by absolutely nothing. Then the inescapable laws of gravity claimed it. This is the terrifying mechanics of progressive collapse. The 4-ton floor slab of the 19th floor smashed violently down onto the 18th. The overwhelming combined weight instantly sheared the supporting walls of the 17th, then the 16th, then the 15th. A vertical avalanche of concrete and steel gathered horrifying speed, tearing through sleeping bedrooms and living rooms. It stripped the entire southeast corner of the tower completely bare, pancaking all the way down to the ground-level podium in a cloud of blinding, choking dust. The entire collapse took less than 15 seconds. In that brief window, 4 people were crushed to death in their beds. 17 others were severely injured, trapped under mountains of rubble. Miraculously, because of the early hour, most residents were asleep in their bedrooms at the back of the building, inches away from the corner that had sheared cleanly away into the void. Ivy Hodge, incredibly, survived, left clinging to a jagged sliver of her kitchen floor, staring out into the open sky where her walls used to be. The image of Ronan Point, its insides ripped open and exposed to the world, instantly became a global icon of failed modernism. If you are finding this exploration into the dark side of engineering compelling, please take a brief moment to strike the like button and subscribe to The Disaster Architect. Your support allows us to keep excavating these buried, tragic histories. As the thick dust settled over Canning Town, a horrifying realization gripped the nation. This wasn't just a tragedy about one building. The subsequent government inquiry was damning. It revealed that the imported system had never once been tested for progressive collapse by British authorities. Even worse, investigators tearing through the rubble found that rushed construction workers, paid by the piece, had simply stuffed old newspapers into crucial structural joints instead of pouring solid concrete. The entire methodology was rotten. Hundreds of similar concrete towers across Britain were immediately deemed structurally suspect. Panic set in. Gas supplies were frantically ripped out of high-rises nationwide. Towers were retroactively strengthened with ugly steel bolts, wrapped around the buildings like desperate splints on a broken spine. Ronan Point itself was stubbornly rebuilt, a monument to political stubbornness, only to be torn down completely in 1986 when structural engineers discovered that even the repairs were failing. The bold, arrogant age of the optimistic high-rise was officially dead, shattered by a tiny gas leak that proved our supposedly invincible concrete utopias were nothing more than fragile houses of cards, just waiting for the slightest breath to bring them crashing down.